Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Eating at a Meeting. And I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath. This week, I am coming to you from California. I have been all over the country this last month, but I am in sunny San Diego. And my guest today is my good friend, Bonni Scepkowski. And she is a meeting planner who is in the life sciences market. Her entire career has been planning life sciences meetings, which blows my mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. But we're going to talk about food and beverage. And originally we were going to talk about corporate compliance and ethic and how that plays into food and beverage. And we're going to talk about a little bit about that. But let's get started and pipe in and ask questions, comments, etc. So, hey, Bonni.
Hey, Tracy, how you doing? This is so weird to be on your podcast instead of hanging out, having lunch.
Oh, it's not weird. It's so much fun. It's just like we're having a regular conversation.
Okay.
Yes, but we have people watching us now.
Well, hi all.
Hi all. Yes. So tell it. I mentioned that you're in the life sciences arena. You've been a meeting planner for, I'm not even going to talk about years, but what is life sciences and what's your role in that as a meeting professional?
My last paying job was at a biotech company, Pharmacia Biotech, which became Amersham, which eventually many mergers later became GE Healthcare. So it's one of the companies that people are familiar with. And I ran their travel department, then their meetings department. And when I left there to start my business, that's where all my business kind of came from. But the more time I spent in that world, the more I felt like I was able to be this like tiny little cog in this world of people who are developing new drugs and managing clinical trials and finding different ways to make the world, it's going to sound really trite, but make the world healthier, make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. People I work with make PCR tests for COVID, work on the vaccines. There are millions of ways that they're bettering the world, and it feels good. So it's this combination of those are the people who call me, and the fact that I can now be part of that world without actually being a scientist. And so I kind of dove into it, leaned into it, we say now. And that's kind of all I want to do. I work with a few other companies, a few other kinds of businesses, but that's kind of that's my jam.
Well, and I like that. And when I was sitting in Lincoln Center in 2009, deciding to start my company, Thrive, I wanted to make the world healthier one event at a time. So kind of in the same context.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. You're not making the food, growing the food, but you get to be part of it.
Right. Exactly.
And it's very similar. And food comes into it for me too.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that. I want to just jump right into this food. Well, actually, let's jump into food and then we'll come back to the compliance and ethics. So you mentioned this challenging experience you had recently inside of a Facebook group, the SPIN Facebook group, which is Senior Planners Industry Network. But when you were working on it, I'm going to call the food and beverage director and the chef because I don't like the menus that are being presented to me. And out came this beautiful event. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but it's also with that's basically your philosophy around event food and beverage.
Yeah, I look at hotel menus as kind of a template of what kind of food the chef likes to make, what's their style, what's their concept around food. But it's very rare that a hotel menu is going to be exciting. It's not made for my groups. And I don't mean life science groups. I mean, this group that's coming this week to this meeting. that menu has nothing to do with them. They don't know those people exist. And I know them, and I know what they like, and I know what's important to them. I know if they're healthy people or old school Southern gentlemen who want biscuits and gravy, or there's always a personality to the group that's not going to be covered in a template of a menu. So I do like to, before I get to contract phase, talk to the chef, talk to the food and beverage director, and make sure that they're okay with messing with the menu. And they always
Well, so there's two really important points in that, in what you just said. Before you get to contract, and talking to the chefs and the food and beverage director to see if they're open with that. That's huge.
Yeah. The last menu I did, which is how we got talking about this, because I was complaining about this process that was kind of nightmarish. I was talking to the salesperson about the menus and what I wanted, because I had a very specific desire for this group. And she just didn't understand. And she said, we'll do all that after the contract. And I just wasn't sure if they were going to be open to it. So I asked to have a Zoom call with the director of food and beverage, but the chef came on too. And it was wonderful. They were so excited about doing something different, and about pleasing the guests, and about personalizing it for these particular people. They got to be creative. I gave them all my cool ideas. They gave me all their cool ideas, and we're all better for it. And the food came out spectacularly. And you could tell they were just putting extra touches on everything, because chefs and food people are driven by that. They want to nurture and feed you. And there's always an excitement around doing something different. They're cooking the same things every day. And for me, I don't want a banquet chicken dinner. There are places for that.
Yeah. And you don't want cookie cutter. I mean, each event should have its own personality and its own flavor. And when you talked about, you knew your attendees. So actually that was a third point from what you said too, is like, you know who your attendees are and you're catering to them.
And every planner, or I hope every planner, knows that the demographic of your group is one of the most important questions. It's one of the most important questions you have when people are asking about doing a meeting, because a meeting for a group of surgeons might be different from a meeting for a group of marketing professionals, or a meeting of the Vegetarian Society of America. Who's coming to the meeting?
Right.
Celiacdisease.org is going to have a different food group. Well, how old are they? What are they active? What is it that they do? What's fun for them? What's interesting for them? And you can figure out what fits their demographic.
Okay, so on that note, how do you, I'm sorry, I cut you off. What'd you say?
No, outside of things like allergies and obvious stuff. How do you know? You have to ask. Okay. You have to ask.
And that's actually, that would be kind of a really fun additional question to ask in your registration form. And Shauna asked this in Spin, just for fun Friday, right? And maybe it's a just for fun question on your registration form that helps you get to know your attendees.
Yeah. And I like to work with small to mid-sized companies, and obviously they grow as we move along. But by the time they've grown, I start with them as a new company. By the time they've grown, I know their culture. I know personality. I know what kind of people that they're trying to bring into their fold. And it tends to fit. And you do have to ask the questions, but you get to know people. You get to know that you better not show up without chocolate to this meeting. And by the way, never show up without chocolate to any meeting. I did that recently. I'll never live it down. Yeah, big mistake. Wow. Rookie mistake. But we all make them. I was focused on other things, and chocolate slipped my mind.
And Shauna just said, I love that registration question. And hello, Shauna Suko.
Hey, Shauna Suko.
Yes. And because it also adds, because the registration process is such a mundane thing that we go through, throwing that fun question in there would actually hopefully get people to think differently about that opportunity to come to your event, because, hey, we're going to have fun with this event, right? What do you do in your off time? What's your favorite food? And actually, that would be a really good question. What's your favorite food to eat, right? And how can you...
Yeah. I like to, I always ask my stakeholder, my main client, if I can just can I just be myself in my communications with your team, or do I have to be a grown up? And they've never told me I had to be a grown up before. They've never said no, but I always ask. And I had a meeting a few months ago where we did a progressive dinner, and the attendees had to choose in advance their main course, which I don't do very often, but it was a small group. And we didn't know that until very late in the game. So it was too late for registration. So I sent out an email and I said, here are your choices, blah, blah, blah. And 90% of them responded. And the last 10%, I sent an email that said, you have 24 hours or you're getting cold SpaghettiOs in a can with a spork. And they all responded by the end of the day, because who's not going to respond to that? Right. And so, you have to be open to being a little bit creative. Food is fun for people.
And it's also personal.
Very personal.
Very personal, because we like what we like. We dislike what we dislike. I mean, I don't like cucumbers. I don't want cucumbers. I will give them to you. Hey, yeah. So I don't have a problem having them on my salad, and I'm going to give them to Bonni, right? But we have to actually take that consideration of the personality around food and beverage as well. And I don't want to go through a buffet that's got rubber chicken and steamed broccoli, and I want it to be presentable. I want it to look beautiful. I want it to be tasty.
Yeah. And it's got to be thoughtful. It's got to be purposeful. But it has to, every buffet says Italian buffet.
Right.
And you know what that means, right? When you go into it, what's going to be on that buffet, or Mediterranean buffet, and you know what all of that means. But if they throw like a sushi platter at the end of your Italian buffet, your brain just breaks. Right. But they do. You see it all the time. These strange mixtures of food. It has to have a purpose.
It does. It really does. And so tell us about the process that you have, and you can use that one example that you had or just in general. What is your process besides talking to that food and beverage director and the chef? And to me, actually, small tangent here, is actually in San Diego about a decade ago, I was talking to a food and beverage director about what I do. And okay, so you've got a lot of people with food allergies and different dietary restrictions. And the food and beverage director's like, well, they can walk through our buffet. They know what they can and cannot eat. And I'm like, I was so put off. I'm like, they can't tell that your chicken salad or whatever it is contains such and such, right? And then the chef walked in, the executive chef, and he's like, oh no, I do this all the time. I make specialty plates for people because I know I have to. And so sometimes there's a discourse or disconnect between that food and beverage director and the executive chef.
I saw a lot of that at my last meeting, not between the food and beverage and the chef, but between the CSM and the chef and food and beverage, and between sales. There's no cohesive process or plan that goes through the whole property, that goes through all the people that you're talking to. So it does get confusing. So my process, I like to use Shauna Suko, who is in the room somewhere. She mentions always.
Do chefs enjoy working off
Shauna,
or do you see it as a hassle? Shauna, I do think it depends on what chef that you have.
It does. 90% of the chefs that I work with get excited about it, or at least make a good show of pretending to be excited about it. But they're open to it. More importantly, to get to the chef, you have to get through food and beverage. You have to get through the catering manager, the food and director of food and beverage. And those are the people that can be difficult to get through to. I feel like I've been really lucky because I talk about it before I get to contract. I've already spoken to those people.
Right.
So everybody's kind of on the same page of, okay, this is going to be slightly different. So I use Shauna always talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And there's one for food and beverage too. And this kind of goes across the board for all of your meeting. So that their first responsibility down at the bottom of the pyramid is nobody can die, right? So you have to feed them. There has to be food. Right. So there has to be food. That's just like in the regular hierarchy of needs, food, air, and water. Those things have to happen. And then you have your budget. You have to work within that budget. And then, as you started to talk about before, there's ethics and compliance and ADA considerations. What are the health implications here? What are the food safety implications here? Does someone have celiac? Are they gluten-free or do they have celiac? That's really important. Just like, do you need your food prepared in a kosher kitchen or do you eat kosher food? They're very different things. Do you need a rabbi or do you need there to be no pork, no shellfish, no meat and dairy on the same plate? Those are very different things. Those are your kind of food safety and ADA and compliance and ethical responsibilities to make sure that people aren't eating something that's going to make them sick or unwell in any way or go outside of their personal belief systems. And then you start moving off into the specifics, like who are your guests? So the meeting you were talking about that was 2 weeks ago, they were extremely healthy, young, 99% women. There were 2 men in the group. They wanted yoga before the meeting. They wanted everything to be outdoors. Half of them had food preferences that had to do with health and animal rights and things. So there was no one who had a physical requirement, but there were pescatarians and vegetarians and vegans and gluten-free and dairy-free, and it was all preference, which is just important. It's just, it's different in how you process things, but it's just as important. And then where are you? What's local to you? What's sustainable? What's environmentally wise? We were at a multi-acre property in the middle of Northern Virginia that grew all their own vegetables. I don't want any vegetables that you don't grow.
Right. Yeah.
Why would I have, if you're growing all this stuff and we can pick it, not we, but they can pick it and that is on our plate, why would I ask for broccoli?
Right.
If that's not what you're growing. And then just for the theme and the concept of the meeting and for the stakeholders, there has to be some stickiness to it. There's your marketing 101. You want people to remember it. You want it to evoke something. You want later for them to say, hey, this reminds me of that time we had that meeting together in Virginia. So all those things are important. What do people talk about at the end of the meeting? They're talking about the food. I don't care what I've done. I don't care if I've hired and found the best speakers, the most gorgeous location. I don't care if we're floating in the middle of the South Pacific. They're going to be talking about the food. That's what people remember. That's what they take away. That's what they talk about later. Oh my God, the food was so good. So it should be intentional and purposeful. It should be, it's such a significant part of the meeting. And I don't like it when people think of us as menu planners or logistics planners. The fact that's not all we do doesn't mean that it's as important as every other element.
Well, and when I liked what you just said there in a couple of different ways, is that people talk about the food and beverage at an event. They're going to complain about it or they're going to love it. And if they remember it, because you've created this delicious experience, again, purposely delicious experience, they're going to remember your event overall. Then they're going to remember, oh my God, that was the one that we also had this great speaker, or I learned this, or whatever. It's going to help them remember the entire context of the meeting, not necessarily just that food and beverage experience, because it's all the different senses. It reached the different senses of that whole event. And so it will add on to it. And we are responsible. I'm doing a session next week for IMEX and called Everybody's Mama. And it's for women. It's for women in the meetings industry. And we are everybody's mom when we're planning a meeting.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And we're planning their food. And you need to look at the food that you're planning as you're their mom. Yes. What would you do?
We're nurturing everyone. So a lot of people are in this industry because they like the logistics, they like the planning, the organization. And a lot of people are in it because we have that like need to serve and nurture, right? I have resting, how can I help you face? It's just a thing. Some people like us want to take care of everybody, want everybody to feel good. And the best planners have both of that, obviously, both of those things. But it's really important to me that people feel taken care of. I want you to notice that there are no strawberries in anything because you're allergic to strawberries and I don't want you to have to think about it. And I want you to feel special because of that, because you are special that's why I did it. I don't want you eating differently from anybody else. In fact, I chose, and my client was delighted about it, which is great because they were really open to this. I chose to do a full vegan meal at one of our meals at this meeting because we had access to all this fresh food. And because so many of the people were vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, I thought, let's switch the script and not have them eat differently from everybody else. Let's have everybody eat together. I had some grilled chicken set aside for people who feel like they need protein with their meal, but everything else, including the desserts, everything was vegan. And I liked that. And everyone loved it. They were really enthusiastic about it, but mostly the vegans and the vegetarians were thrilled. Because it's the only time they're ever, unless they're at a meeting that's specifically for them, they're never at a buffet or a plated dinner where they don't have to ask about anything.
100%.
And it felt good. Why do you have to add meat to everything?
Right. And I like the fact that you had the meat on the side for the people who did want that. And Chef Murray Hall in Toronto does the same thing. He's like, we're going to start with this vegan plant-based, right? And then we add that animal protein into it somehow, which jumps me to a story that I saw this morning. I don't remember. It was somewhere on Facebook. It says, the world is changing. Helsinki just bans all meat products from any government facility, catered function, anything bringing in.
Yep. I saw that. I think I read it on your page.
That's fantastic. It's amazing. And there's more than just Helsinki that's done it. So, and it is only for the government properties, but we have to think about that. Some of those convention centers are government property around the country, right? So, and this week, if you haven't paid attention, is the UN Climate Summit. So the food supply system is on the table. It is being discussed and what that means. Yeah. And actually, I don't know if you knew this, but in California, and a couple of weeks ago, a chef was complaining that California has already banned foie gras from menus, but they're banning pork. I'm like, what do you mean they're banning pork? And I went and Googled it, and it's a new proposition that was enacted in 2018 and becomes effective in January, is that the only pork allowed into the state is pork that has been raised humanely in managing specific guidelines. And like there's only 4 farms in the country that currently do that.
Wow. When you said bans pork, I was like, oh, that might be going too far, but allows only ethical, sustainable.
Exactly.
That's a good thing. And that's one of the things about things like vegan menus and local menus goes way beyond the trendiness of I'm a locavore, or I'm a vegan. I only eat things that were picked in my backyard or within 1 cubic foot of where I live. It's a huge climate issue. Huge. It's a huge environmental issue. The trucks that have to bring things, the chemicals they have to use to keep things fresh before they get to you, all of those things come into play. So yeah, I think there's so many layers of importance to all of this. And with the right groups of people, it really adds to the meeting. I mean, the food should always be delicious and interesting. Whether this particular client, any particular client is thinking of it in an environmental way, it's nice if they do, but they don't have to buy into all the reasons.
Right.
That it's a good idea. I think the most important one is your guests are going to remember this and love you for it. I've gotten so many emails about food at meetings that were juggling multiple flaming chainsaws to get the basics done, just to have the meeting. And all anybody's talking about is the food. And I'm okay with that. But it shows just how valuable it is. It's what people take away from it.
Yep. And earlier you said it's you're showing care, because providing food for somebody is showing care. It is the one thing that we all have to do is we all have to eat and we all have to poop, right? But food, we can't poop without food. And we have to feed
no poop today.
I didn't know we were talking about poops either. So sorry. We'll go off
the circle of life.
Yes, it is. So I have somebody wrote in here, are you running into new chefs with less experience now? So yes, but I want to show a caveat. So a couple of weeks ago, Bonni and I and Shauna actually were on site at an event in Dallas, and they all make fun of me because the chefs become my best friends because of my food allergies. And I was chatting with him at the end of the event, and I was talking about staffing, what's going on and how are we doing this? And he said one of his best employees right now is a kid or a guy whose only culinary experience was working at a Waffle House.
And this is a 5-star hotel.
And this is a 5-star property. And he hired a chef from Waffle House. And he said he comes to work on time, he leaves to work on time, and he comes with great ideas and an eagerness to learn new culinary tricks. He knows how to smother and cover and whatever else you can do with those potatoes, right? But he goes, I would never have looked at him before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a chance, and I'm so glad that I took a chance. So going back to that question, have the conversations with those chefs. What do you watch on TV, chef? What are you seeing interesting? Ask the questions and seeing if they want to be creative.
And I'll ask them directly, but I find that the newer to the industry they are, the more excited they are about trying new things.
Yep.
The older they are, the more experienced they are, the younger ones are more enthusiastic. The more experienced ones will come to you with yes and.
Yes.
So once you've kind of bonded and let them know that you're not trying to tell them how to do their job, because I always say I could never be a chef. I throw food into a pan and it comes out yummy or it doesn't. But I could never do what they do. So I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but these are the things that I'm hoping to see. And then very often the ones who've been around for a long time will say, oh yeah, and you know what else I did once? Or when I was here, I did this. And so they're happy with the exchange of ideas. They're more confident in being questioned, in discussing things and having input. Whereas somebody who's new is still needs a little bit more care and respect for their position.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And
so you want to know who you're talking to and make sure you're respecting them and not putting them in a place where they feel like they're being challenged.
Exactly. And it's just like, hey, this is our demographics of our group. Be kind of educational as well as quizzical, not questioning, but quizzical. And I think it does help play into it a lot. I mean, I had a chef when he walked backwards and, I wish I knew about these dietary needs up front. And I'm like, well, that's why I was trying to have these conversations and the tastings and everything so we can get this challenge or this opportunity out of the way. I'm like, I don't want MSG, I don't want tomatoes, and I don't want gluten. And he's like, what do I cook? And I'm like, really?
A million things.
Exactly.
A million things.
Right. But all right, I want to go back to this thing of before you sign the contract. Mm-hmm. So this conversation with the food and beverage director and the chef should actually be then at your site visits and in your RFPs.
It's really hard to do, but be tenacious because salespeople want to close the deal. And I love my salespeople. They're amazing salespeople. But you're adding another barrier between the discussion and the signature. So you're saying, okay, and now I want to add this barrier in. And they're trained to try to talk you out of that and just sign it. We'll deal with it later. Oh no, our chef is very creative. I believe that. I believe it with every ounce of my being. But are they the kind of creative that I'm looking for? Or are they open to being that? And these are conversations we should be having. And it's harder and harder. I'm not running a meetings factory here. I'm not doing so many meetings right now, certainly, that I don't have the time to wait a little bit or to do things on their schedule. It would have been different a couple of years ago when, I was never in the office, but still you can always make that time. You can always find the time.
Yep.
And
I think right now it's really going to be a bigger issue too with the staffing challenges as well as the food supply challenges. Mm-hmm. We actually have to have these conversations a lot up front, a lot more. And I think salespeople need to understand that too, because I need to understand that you're going to do this. And which just brings this story to mind, is like this planner was planning a wedding. It needed to be completely gluten-free because it was celiac. And 2 weeks out, the chef is like, I don't know what that means. And granted, this was 10 years ago, but still, they're like, I don't know what that means. I can't do this. And so 2 weeks out, had to find a new caterer. But so you have to ask those questions up front, and knowing your history and knowing going back to what you said, knowing your group.
Yeah. And sometimes you just have to say, I realize that bespoke menus may cost a little bit more than your standard menu, because you've got a process, because you've got the ingredients, because of all these things. And then you have to be flexible on the planner side. If you really want something and it sounds really cool to you and they can't do it, don't be a jerk.
Right.
Not everything can always be. Let them,
Yes.
Listen to them. Listen to what the chef and then F&B people have to say. They're the experts. How frustrated we get as planners when people tell us how to do our jobs. Yep. Nobody likes to be told how to do their jobs, but you're the consumer. So you're asking for what you want, and do it respectfully. Do everything. Obviously, we should be doing everything respectfully. We don't always, as an industry, show enough respect for our industry partners.
100%. And
that makes all the difference.
It really does. It's like, how do you have that relationship?
I got a free giant platter of smoked salmon in my avocado toast station from the chef.
Wow. That's a crazy little piece to add.
That's a crazy little gimme. And it was just because we had such an enjoyable time doing this together. And there was so much mutual respect, and there was so much flexibility on both sides. There were things they couldn't do. There were things that had to change at the last minute. This is life post-COVID. This is life anyway. Mm-hmm. This is just life. You have to show a little grace and have a little flexibility. And sometimes you get a big giant platter of smoked salmon out of it.
Okay. So, that prompted a question. Talking about grace and the flexibility, but oh my gosh, what was it? It was about the planning.
Was it about the lox? Was it about the lox, the smoked salmon?
And which takes me back to Burger's Bagels, when I served bagels and lox and cream cheese, but long time ago. Yes, LA, this is a conversation about her meeting from a couple of weeks ago. But
yes, and thank you for everyone in the industry knew about that meeting, because I was having so many challenges before I got to the chef and food and beverage director that everyone was like a novel I was writing in our group page. And you all saved my sanity. Thank you, LA.
You bring such joy and fun to us answering your questions. Okay, so it was more about that, like that, thinking about it. So one of the things that I say in my speaking sessions all the time, education sessions, is that it is our number one expenditure, food and beverage. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, I'm going to say generally, it is the thing that a majority of us do not spend any time on. We go and we do the check boxes of, all right, I want this appetizer, I want these 3 hots, these 3 colds, and this dessert, right? But everything that you're saying and have said in the last 35 minutes is like, we need to spend more time.
We need to spend so much more time on it. And we talk about the food portion being our biggest line item at the meeting is almost always our client's biggest line item of the year.
Okay. That's a good point.
So every component of this meeting should carry as much weight as the others. And food is so far at the top of the list. So why aren't we spending? Why? Because it's much easier to choose off the menu. Yep. It's just easy. And I'm not saying I've never done this. This is lessons learned through years and watching the industry change and feeling the need to make these changes for my own clients. But it's their biggest spend. So it's our biggest line item in their biggest spend.
That's a really great way to look at it, because, and as we talk about coming back from COVID and having these meetings, the discussions about meetings are going to be really more pointed and saying, why are we having this meeting? Which means that every element of our meeting has to have extra care to it and extra purpose to it.
Purpose and intentionality. Mm-hmm. That old meme that we've all been passing around amongst ourselves forever that says another email that should have been another meeting that should have been an email. I've been talking to my clients for years about modifying your agenda. This is before COVID, so that the time together is purposeful. Get the spreadsheet, sales numbers stuff, send that out in advance. Send this out in what do you need to spend your time together doing? What requires face time? And now more than ever. And with everyone being at that extra level of stress, add a little time in for longer breaks, more interesting food experiences, more longer lunches and dinners, and let people spend that time together where they're not staring at the stage or listening. Let there be more active engagement.
Yeah.
Bring food into your team building.
Yep.
Enjoy it more.
So many different ways to bring food into team building these days.
Yeah.
And but I've seen, and I've been to quite a few meetings since April within our industry, and it's still that run from this break and you have an hour, or this breakout session, you have an hour to eat, and then we're back into that, right? Make it an hour and a half for lunch. Make it
very hard. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's very hard for people when they're spending that kind of money and they have to justify all that time away from the office and all that money spent. And then if they add up that time that they're taking breaks or they're eating or they're networking or they're having cocktails, it starts to feel like they're throwing money away. But the truth of the matter is the reason you're meeting in person is so you can spend time together. And if you're not creating that space for people to spend time together with a 30-minute break, end it for, give them time to change before dinner and take a walk together. This group in Virginia did yoga in the morning. The other group, a couple of weeks before in Providence, they set up a morning run, started just a little bit later so that they could do that. But what a great way to spend their time together. We ended this last meeting with s'mores around a campfire.
Yep.
Oh, you have a bonfire? Do you have marshmallows and Hershey bars and eggs and graham crackers? So just using the time wisely does not mean jamming information into people.
Well, and I was at an event in Cabo a couple of weeks ago, and we had and I was there as a speaker, and we had the education, and then they had activities and things. But one of the attendees, we were sitting at the pool, and she said, I love the fact that they've given us the time to network. And she's like, I just landed 3 deals just standing here in the pool talking to people that are at the conference.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing about the meals and sitting down and having that conversation, because so many more deals are signed, sealed, and delivered over a glass of wine or cocktail or club soda in my case.
Yeah. That's how the world worked back in the day. That's how it used to work. Before we thought we had to fill every second.
Right.
I'm not saying we're ever going to go back to the 9-to-5 workday where at the end of the day, nobody can reach you because what's a cell phone? But we can go back to these times where breaking bread together is a pretty big deal. Having a drink together is a pretty big deal. And it should be a pretty big deal. And it should be included into your time together, because otherwise it could have been a Zoom call. Otherwise it could have been an email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. So we could talk about this all day, and I feel like I'm just talking to a mirror because everything you say is what I believe. So thank you very much for reiterating it. And I didn't plan this for everybody listening, but so Bonni, what ways can people get in touch with you first and foremost?
Oh, yay. My email address, my website, for you could get my email address is stellarmeetingswithans.com.
I'm going to put that in the chat here.
Thank you. And you can always call me. I can put my number in here too, and my email address. Okay. And I love just talking to people. I don't need to talk to you just because you have business.
Right.
Yeah. And I do have a really important tip that I swear I don't want to forget.
My next thing was like, what do you have 3 tips that you can give people as we close this out?
3, I don't know. We'll come up with, the first one is really important. Every time your client wants to cut back on a budget, they suggest a continental breakfast. That's a bad idea. Find somewhere else to cut the budget. Everyone wants breakfast. Everyone wants breakfast. Everyone needs breakfast. It's so important. It's overly priced. Yes, it eats into your budget. Yes, you will get so much more out of people. And do a variety of stuff. There should never be a breakfast that doesn't have bacon. I'm sorry. People look forward to bacon and eggs, but do bacon and eggs and avocado toast, or bacon and eggs and oatmeal, and yogurts and fruits. Have healthy alternatives. There's 3 different ways people eat breakfast. They go for purely healthy, they go for I need my carbs, or they go for I need my bacon and eggs. So make sure that you've covered those things. Leaving out, putting a healthy breakfast together and then omitting bacon and eggs, you're going to make enemies. Yep. My second tip is that I forgot chocolate. Never forget chocolate.
Even for breakfast?
There should always be chocolate somewhere in the day, in one of your breakfasts, one of your desserts, something. Somebody should always be able to stuff a Snickers bar or something into their pocket, but not a chocolate fountain because they're disgusting. My personal opinion. Have you ever been to a wedding where some kid has stuck their tongue into a chocolate fountain? You'll never use one again.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's kind of gross.
It's totally gross. It's important that I share that bit of knowledge.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so that was 2, which is great. So my final question is, what is your favorite food and beverage?
I like, if I'm going to have wine, I like a Sauvignon Blanc or a Chenin Blanc or a Pinot Grigio. Food. God, I love food. I really like tropical fruits, like mangoes and stuff, and yogurt or chocolate. Please, God, chocolate always.
Okay, so talking about tropical fruit, yesterday I was doing my walk. I'm in San Diego doing my walk in the neighborhood, and the Amazon Prime guy in his little minivan was there, and I noticed he had 5 pomegranates in the dash.
That's awesome.
And he had the window down. I'm like, are those pomegranates? And he's like, yeah. He's like, do you want one? And so he gave me one. He's like, go home and crack it open and eat it. It's really healthy for you. And I'm like, okay, thank you.
Those of you, I'm sure all of you, Tracy, because you're watching this, but Tracy is known for never having met a stranger. And it doesn't surprise me in the least, because if you're walking down the street with Tracy, you better factor in an extra hour to talk to everybody you walk by and learn amazing things about people. And just, it's one of my favorite qualities about you. It's just you, everywhere you go, you're best friends with everybody that walks by. I love that.
I scared one woman the other day in the airport because she was emptying the trash, and I just put my hand on her back and I just said, thank you for what you do. And she just
from 30 feet. Yeah.
What are you talking about, Lee?
But thank her for, it's the fact that you do that is delicious.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll give you a last tip is don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask, and be a little bit tenacious. Don't be a jerk, but be tenacious. We're being paid in the long run to make these experiences worthwhile and memorable and lovely. And it's not a side effect that it's supposed to be nurturing and creative and comfortable and safe for everyone. That is such the core of what we're supposed to be doing out there, in my opinion. So ask again and go somewhere else if you can't get it done.
Yeah, exactly. Before you sign the contract.
Before you sign the contract.
Yeah. Well, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So appreciate you.
This was so much fun. Talk later. All right.
Yes, talk later. Everybody, thank you so much. And stay on when we're done. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This is the Eating at a Meeting podcast live edition. We are here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern, talking to experts just like Bonni on how to create safe, inclusive, and sustainable food and beverage experiences, because we all have to eat. So until next Wednesday, stay safe and eat well. See you later. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.